good and to solve problems by applying new technologies in relevant domains. Today, I'm very happy to give a virtual welcome to Benedikt Grütz, Vice President of the European Senate of Economy and Technology and the Director of DACH Alliance at UTEC Chamber. Andy Palanasamy, Director of Smart Cities Innovations at Parsons. Dr. Floridea Di Giacomo, Economist and Urban Analyst at Cambiamo. Professor Yoram Shiftan, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Technion and Head of the Israeli Center of Smart Transportation Research. Amar Safi, Smart Cities and Development Engineer at Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure in United Arab Emirates. Shafia Al-Shieli, Smart Cities and Asset Management Engineer and Development Team Leader at Federal Roads Network of Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure in United Arab Emirates. And Bob McQueen, Smart Mobility Consultant and CEO at Bob McQueen and Associates, and also Associate of the UTEC Mobility Alliance. One of the goals of the UTEC Mobility Alliance is to connect people and to create impact by applying European technology to achieving net zero in the mobility sector and the SDGs around the world. We want to be part of this discussion and to get new impulses or exchange ideas like we do today. But let me give a quick introduction to this topic on the agenda, how to ensure equity in mobility. So mobility is in a state of transition that will fundamentally impact the way we live. On whether the future combination of technology innovations such as connectivity, sharing, automation, and electrification will transform passenger and freight transport into people-centric mobility. Today, we want to explore with our experts what equity means in mobility. With the SDGs, we have set bold political goals, but how do we going to achieve them? What can we do to give everyone access to a safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport system? A further target is improving road safety, notably by expanding public transport with special attention to the needs of the weakest. By that, fairness is another essential aspect of smart mobility for all types of travelers and all sectors of the community. What is the relationship between fairness and equity from a global point of view? Do we have a chance to measure equity or analytic techniques to understand and manage equity issues? Is this feasible on a grand scale? So, a lot of questions to be tackled today, but let's start with an overview to the agenda. Firstly, Benedikt will give a UTEC address and mission statement. Afterwards, Andy in his keynote will present aspects of ensuring equity in transport. He'll address why mobility is not equal for everyone, why our mobility ecosystem is not inclusive, and what can be done to change this. Following this, we will open the panel discussion in which Dr. Floridea Di Giacomo, Professor Yoram Shiftan, Amar Safi, and Shafia Al-Shieli will participate. Using the given insight from the keynote, we will expand the discussion and address the impact of information and techniques to raise our understanding of equity issues. Also, what can be done to improve equity. Finally, we will have an open question and answer session with all of you. So you are invited to send in all your questions, comments, and remarks via the chat function. Today, our panel will be facilitated by Bob McQueen, as already announced, who is advocate in the UTEC Mobility Alliance. So now first, I'd like to hand over to Benedikt. Thank you, Benedikt. The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this welcome speech, and thank you for the invitation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome from my side as well to all of you to this webinar of the Mobility Alliance. As Bernd said before, please let me introduce our EUTEC ecosystem, our EUTEC chamber environment in a nutshell to have a little warm up to the session. If you cannot see my slides, please click on the presentation button at the bottom right corner besides this hand button. EUTEC Chamber was founded in 2015 with this vision, technology obliges. You see it on the top right corner, and now 7 years later in 2022, it is Europe's leading tech organization in this regards with over 2,000 members. We are a registered NGO and a non-profit organization, and we have three major goals. It is competitiveness, growth, and sustainability. And we believe that we'll reach each of these goals with technology. So for us, technology is the key. and the key is not a prohibition or a restriction. The question always is, how do we work? So how do we achieve these 3 goals? You see in this slide, we have 16 different alliances. These are divided into regional alliances. On the right-hand side, you see the impact alliances, in the middle, the tech alliances. In our regional alliances, we work on topics specialized, to example, a region like Africa or DACH or Latin America. So let's say very different topics, but defined regions. In our impact alliances, the region plays not that important role. Here we are discussing about overriding topics that are related to the higher goals of mankind, like SDGs, policy, climate action. And in the middle, you see our tech alliances. Here we discuss about defined and specialized topics like mobility today. So the most important thing about this slide is that we are combining those different alliances. As an example, when we are working on a mobility topic that is specified to Germany and DACH region, we combine the results with the mobility alliance. So this interdisciplinary combination around the world is very special for our organization. What about our convening power? We have over 200 webinars, as you can see here, over 50,000 registrations, and also our speaker database is growing faster and faster and faster, with nearly at least 700 keynote speeches per year. What are the benefits of our members or for our members? They get access to speakers and panelists. They get business opportunities because our tech forum allows to match people and to match business with each other. We have got access to, let's say, EU tenders, worldwide funding, of course. That is also a huge benefit for our members and offers a lot of advantages for their own business. But last but not least, the most important thing is that if we sum up all EU Tech meetings in our virtual tech forum, our members have over 400 points of contacts and over 400 opportunities to directly connect to their EU Tech colleagues. And this is our ecosystem behind it with our insights. We are creating white papers, position papers. We have our quarterly magazine, Visions for Europe. We have several programs like awards, Climate Action Partnership, EU Tech Center in China. And our tech forum offers a lot of additional benefits like virtual booths, for example, expos, and of course physical events, which we will have in 4 different European capitals in the next year, I hope after Corona disease. Just to have a few examples. This is the last slide, ladies and gentlemen. Engage and benefit. To learn more about our chamber, please reach out to our dear colleagues, Marcus or Federico. So that was my short part, a short deep dive into our EU Tech and EU Senate ecosystem. Thank you very much for listening so far. Guys, have a great panel. Always keep in mind, technology obliges. And now I want to hand the microphone to our today's moderator. Dear Bob McQueen, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Benedict. Thank you to Serdar and the Mobility Alliance for giving me the opportunity to moderate the panel today. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker, Andy Palanisamy from Parsons Corporation in Dubai. I've known Andy for a long time. I won't say how long because it'll tell you how old I am. But Andy's a technology and policy professional. And what I love about Andy is he's a technical engineer who actually has a great level of communication skills, as you'll find out today. He's got 24 years of public-private sector experience, tackling complex projects and infrastructure and smart city technologies. He currently serves as director for the Smart Cities Innovation Department at Parsons in Dubai, and he manages a variety of advanced technology and smart city projects across the Middle East region. Earlier in his career, he was affiliated with Ford Motor Company, U.S. Department of Transportation, and the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. And in fact, I think that's where Andy and I met for the first time at the JPL office in Washington, D.C. So he's led various technology programs. I think justifiably he's recognized as an industry thought leader and recognized for his contribution to US DOT's Intelligent Transportation Systems Program and Connected Vehicle Research Program. He holds an MBA from Harvard Kennedy School and a Bachelor in Civil Engineering. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Bob. Sorry, I was busy firefighting with my technical challenges here for a little bit. So my apologies for going away for a few minutes.
No problem.
All right.
Don't forget to share your screen.
Yep, I'm going to do that right now. Share screen 2. All right, I'm going to start the presentation. Hope you guys can see this. Can you see it?
It's loading. Yep, we can see it.
All right, fantastic. So I'm going to be in the dark mode for a little bit because I'm not seeing all of you guys on screen, but we'll do my best. Okay, so my name is Andy Planosomi. As Bob outlined, now I work for Parsons here in Middle East, and I oversee a portfolio on smart cities across all of GCC. Okay, and a quick background about myself. I grew up in India, and then I moved to the US, got 20 years under my belt, 23 years rather. And then I worked on all these different areas in different parts of the government and the private sector, and spent some time in school trying to get my policy chops. But I also have some very unique items on my resume. Like, for example, I was part of NASA JPL working on some very interesting projects, which is where I happened to come across Bob. And so my journey started actually, I wanted to become a pilot, but never happened. But I ended up going into my next favorite thing, which is understanding infrastructure and mobility issues, because I always like things that move. But it's a harsh reality because you realize there are so many issues that plague sort of providing mobility in a manner that's accessible to everybody. So by the way, I'm going to use these slides to set the stage and then move the conversation in such a way that we will have quite a bit of time to do the Q&A and to dive into some of the key issues and solutions and stuff. Okay, so bear with me if I run fast. Okay, so first thing is to just define what is equity and mobility. So I usually like to start my sort of the presentation with these 2 slides. The first one's like 1900. You can see how many cars and how many pedestrians are moving around, how many rather horse-drawn carriages and pedestrians are moving around in that space. And this is in the early stages of 1900, last century, I would say, 19th century rather. So now if you can find that one car where the yellow circle is, and now watch what happens. So the equation is completely turned around within just a decade. So now you can see that pretty much all the pedestrian activity is relegated to the side of the street. And of course, motor vehicles have taken over. So in this case, you wondered, like, what kind of equity do we have as road users? And of course, there are no bicycles or any other form of transportation here. So now it also brings up the question of how do we divide the space in terms of like who uses the space and how it's being used. So this is just a chart that I found online to demonstrate that, like, how inequitable in terms of like the allocation of space in our cities and communities. Driving takes up quite a bit of the space, which relegates very little space for everything else, for bicycling, for walking. So it presents a very unfair picture. So, I mean, I grew up in the developing world, so I felt, at least it deserves a mention that in many parts of the world, we don't even have proper infrastructure, let alone for encouraging sort of like a mixed mode of transportation. So here, as you can see on the left-hand side, people don't even have the sidewalks to walk properly, and they're not designed properly, even if they have some of them. So this is to paint a picture of like what the reality is to where we want to go and how unfair in terms of who we are serving and how we are serving. And also, here's one example that I found in terms of like, making our cities much more efficient and also accessible. We need to provide good public transportation, and for which the first mile, last mile is always a very key important issue. And one of the key issues is bus stops. And as you can see here in Atlanta, they didn't even have proper shelters for some of these people. Imagine standing at 40 degrees waiting for the bus to arrive. So, and are we providing these seats for people to sit on in the shelters? Sometimes they're just shelters. There's no place to sit. So imagine being a pregnant woman with 2 kids. So it makes it much more harder. So that all brings up to like, how do we define mobility in terms of the transportation, equity in transportation context, right? So it's just, this is a very important definition. And I felt like, there are so many different viewpoints out there, but this one crisply captures everything. So transportation equity, of course, is about efficiency of transportation, its cost, and people's mobility levels. And we have to make sure that people have access to all modes of transportation and at all different races, all different classes, gender, irrespective of the gender and your disability levels. And of course, we have to make sure that it provides equal access to everybody, not only affordable for the rich or the poor, or like in certain cases, for the disabled or the not so abled. So now, how do we provide all of this, and how much are we spending in terms of our ability to access different modes of transportation? So as I said, this presentation is going to set the stage for more discussions in the coming minutes. But just to show how unfair we are spending our dollars in terms of accessing these different modes of transportation. In the US, about 15% of the money in a household is spent on transportation. And in Europe, the number drops to 13.5 because Europe has traditionally been pretty good with public transportation. They've spent a lot of effort and time building those networks and making it much more reliable. So now, as we are doing all of these things in terms of like preparing our infrastructure, providing these services, are we subsidizing bad behavior? Because we are not actually factoring in sort of like the externalities of the impacts on some of these modes of transportation, particularly from driving. Who's driving and how much the society pays? This is a very important issue in terms of like, how are we unfairly burdening people who are not drivers or people who do not own cars? So I'm just putting some numbers here on the screen for you to absorb, but it goes to show that it is not an easy conversation to have. Okay. And also, like, how are we aligning our budgets with the goals that we set for ourselves? And here we are, like, this is an example from LA that I captured, and the city has defined, okay, so here are my goals for creating what you call zero emissions areas. And this is how we're going to achieve them, and how they are prioritizing different projects, and how it rolls under part of their strategy, and who their partners are, and how they're implementing these different solutions. And so what do we need in this complex picture? This is sort of like the ideal that we're trying to get to, like, going from the current mess to building what we call the complete streets. But it's not going to be easy, right? Like, so there's going to be a transition period, and how are we going to manage the transition? And the transition is also pretty interesting because there are so many other pressing issues for us to deal with. So this is just to show you like what would be that equitable distribution of space looks like in an urban community, or in any community for that matter. So how do we design streets that are complete and also that are available for all users and for all types of users? So why is this important? There are many drivers in this conversation, right? Like, for example, how do we build an environment where we are addressing these pressing issues like climate change? So today, for the first time, I'm told that Dubai has the same temperature as London. So we are entering a new reality, and how are we going to manage this chaos as things become very, very different? And now the other driver is technology evolution. 10 years ago, there was no Uber, and now Uber is everywhere in the planet, 15 years rather. Automated vehicles are now starting to creep up on the horizon. And as you can see, the mass adoption happens very, very quickly. We saw it in the earlier slides with those cars. And now, just to present the idea of like where this is all headed, just to set the stage for the audience to get a grounding, we in the industry, we look at sort of like the evolution of the mobility spectrum under these four pillars, basically. They're coalescing under these four pillars: automation, connectivity, shared, and also electric vehicles. So I'm just going to fly through these slides here just to give you an idea of like how fast we've come. This used to be a pipe dream for a lot of us in the industry, but now this is now commercialized operation in San Francisco. We are now seeing AVs on the streets. And of course, everything is going to be connected as we move along. And the other idea is that like electrifying everything is an important issue in the climate change conversation. So now this is becoming a very important topic, particularly here in the MENA region, as well as in the US as well. Like vehicles are being subsidized, and there's a fast uptake for electric vehicles. So, and again, the idea of like, this equity and fairness in how do we provide access to e-mobility? Like, do we allocate the same amount of subsidies for an e-bike versus an electric car? And do we allocate more space for these e-bikes than electric vehicles? Some electric vehicles can use a certain what you call HOV lanes in the US. So now, do we allow those kind of similar scenarios for electric bikes in the future? And also the future is now moving towards shared as well. The shared options are bringing in some very interesting conversations in terms of addressing the first mile, last mile issues, and also the equity issues. Like some of the users remain unbanked. How do you bring them into a banking system so now they can access all these different modes of transportation under one payment platform? So this is going to be a very important critical issue for all of us. And of course, mobility as a service, as we talked about, uniting all these different modes of transportation under one roof so customers have the ability to access them and pay for it. So digital transactions, this is going to be a very, very important issue, especially with new products coming into the market. Like, for example, Bitcoin, that's now a little bit more in the, what do you call, the hot waters, but it's becoming a very interesting conversation. How do people access these advanced technologies in terms of payments, and how do they even understand how these things work? So there's an education component that's attached to it as well. And of course, despite all of these advances, there's still the infrastructure issues that are dogging us in terms of like, how do we engineer them? How do we educate our public in terms of accessing these new issues? And in terms of like educating the next generation of professionals who are entering the space about equity and all these other important social issues. And of course, enforcing them is also very important. Like if somebody is violating it, how do we go about fixing those issues? And the last one here is the funding and financing. How do we finance some of these ideas as we go forward? And this is a political discussion in some communities, not very easy, but we need to have these conversations sooner than later. And of course, now moving on to the technology space, which is where I operate, the 21st century oil is data. I mean, that's sort of like the cliched version of saying it. Data is being used to monitor how people move around the space and how space is being utilized and what modes of transportation are available at any given time. So data is pretty much ubiquitous these days. And how do we go about capturing all of this in terms of making sense of what we do? One thing is to collect the data, but then again, how do you use it? So, of course, for us to understand accessibility and understanding equity, we have to understand how people are accessing things and how people are using our services and products and our infrastructure. So the mantra here is that you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So that's where I think it all boils down to. And the question is also like, are we adequately capturing? Are we adequately using the data? Or we're just simply collecting it, but we don't know how to use the data. So these are big questions that we're answering now. And of course, with technology comes a bias in terms of like, how we are teaching our machines to identify people of color. For example, if an automated vehicle traveling at 60 miles per hour or 100 kilometers per hour is not recognizing a person of darker complexion at that speed, it could be fatal. That one moment, a programmer or the algorithm that we developed is not sensing that this is a person and not a car, or makes a bad decision. How do we go about fixing these kind of biases? So we need to help not just educate the programmers, but also train the machines to do better in terms of like, fixing these biases that pop up. There's going to be an interesting conversation, especially in communities of color around the world, because as the technology creeps in, now you will have a challenge in front of you to address, or else the technology uptake will not be there. And the very first accident is always what sets the AV industry back. So it is a very important discussion that we need to get into. And who's left behind in this conversation? The young, the old, and the lower income groups, and also folks who are not technology savvy. And I said technology illiterate. And even sometimes it's beyond my comprehension how fast the space is developed. It's developed, or it's developing as we speak. With more advancements comes more challenges, but not everybody is able to keep up with these challenges. So how do we bring everybody to a place where we can make progress? And old is new again. So this is sort of like the new mantra that's being pushed, the 15-minute cities. What I see is an opportunity for us to redefine our spaces and redefine our modes of transportation. And also technology is just not the panacea for all our problems. It's just one solution. But how do we use that to address and fix some of the issues that we have? Telecommuting is one of the issues that we didn't even talk about here. But it could be a big leveler, or it could be make the playing field quite level for a very, very small cost. But we have such a struggle trying to provide access to people for broadband, especially in the US and other places. And in Dubai here, we have some of the highest rates for broadband. How do we use those levers of technology to address some of the mobility issues? So I'm just going to skip this one. Of course, we talked about a lot of these things, but in a world that it's trying to find its way after the pandemic, and now with all these emerging challenges like climate change and technology, how do we go about, finding a place that is equitable and accessible for everybody? So I will leave it at that. And this is to set the stage, as I said, but we will get into more discussions during Q&A. Bob, back to you. Sorry, I took a few extra seconds here.
No problem, Andy. Thank you for keeping it on time and creating an impressive range of topics. I don't know about anybody else, but I have a gazillion questions, but I'll hold them for the Q&A time that's coming up later. Just amazing. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, obviously, we're getting the benefit of your varied experience in different sectors. So let me move on and keep us on schedule. I'd like to introduce Dr. Floridia De Como now, economist and urban analyst with Cambiamo in Madrid. Floridia is a PhD in transport and urban planning at the École Nationale de Ponts et Chaussées in Paris Tech, and an MSc in economics at Bocconi University Milan. She's co-director of Cambiamo and has an extensive experience on travel behavior modeling and transport assessment with various academic institutions and authorities. I also, on a personal note, want to thank Floridia, because when we were planning for the webinar, we realized that she was going to be in Canada, and it's about 3:30 in the morning in Canada. So thank you, Floridia, for being a night owl on our behalf and getting up early. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Bob. And of course, we cannot lose the opportunity to talk about equity, and as well in the way where we understand equity. And thanks for Andy for doing the frame of this webinar. I'm Floridia De Como, like Bob said, and we are from Cambiamo. Cambiamo is an NGO based in Madrid, and as well, we are observer of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. So this means that we are very involved in the negotiation, and we are assisted now. So when we started to work on equity with as well some other panelists here, a lot of since my first master thesis, and then we go ahead with a European project. We get this transport equity cost action, and we started to work on that with a large group of researchers in 2013. And this is with equity in transport, what this means. If we go to the next slide, we can see that equity can be defined like the in some way the distribution of goods and beds among people, and this is not the different in transports. So and this is for what? For satisfying people needs in transport. I think that like Andy said, the COVID-19 pandemic time highlighted how transport should be in the missed place where well-being and welfare should be done. And this is just what we are talking about in terms of transport poverty. When we have people and we have a distribution of beds concentrated in some part of society and goods in another part of society, we have a problem of distribution. Of course, we have what in social science we talk, we name social poverty. And transport is the same. If we have in some place concentration of activities or accessibility and infrastructures or good walking sites and so on, or biking sites and so on, and we have this, we produce this transport poverty. And this is the key question for assessing transport impacts in terms of inclusiveness, accessibility, air quality, and climate change. We see when we used to organize to analyze, the survey in a different part of the world. And next slide, please. And we can see that most of we move mostly for caring. Since a long time, transport planning was focused on commuting. That is important. I mean, it's important to deserve commuters and for getting their job, because it's the way for living, for getting money for their family. But when we analyze the survey everywhere in the world, we can see that mobility of care represents like 40% of daily trips. And with the COVID, we had this percentage that just increased a lot to 80%. And what means mobility of caregiving? It's we include all the trips that we need for sustaining the life. So all the trips to carry out errands, daily shopping, goods and medicines, visiting to health centers for accompanying some person or for yourself, accompanying dependent persons like minors, elderly, and people with disabilities. And but still, transport planning is mainly oriented to commuting. And next slide, please. When we ask to people, what do you think about their transport, the transport services, we can see that we have like an unsatisfied by gender people. And this means that we are not covering the needs of people for some specific activities, mainly for the activities for caring. So it's not just an issue of equity, it's an issue of functioning of the society as well, to take care of the caring mobility. And this is the same people who are suffering transport and poverty, and as well time poverty. This is something that is related to transport poverty, because of course, if we need to accompany children to school, and then we come back to the and then we come back to we need to go to the work, and we have not a good combination for this trip chain, we face a problem. Please, next slide. And this problem was much more highlighted during the COVID. Actually, we discovered that people who needs to move every day for all their daily activities, for working as well, are people who are in charge of caregivers. And when we were analyzing this data during the COVID, where I said that 80% of trips were oriented for caring, we see that most of these care and frontline people are women. So there is like a double check: social poverty, gender, and other intersectional characteristics that characterize, and we need to take into account in equity. Equity cannot be only oriented to technical issues, but we need to take into account seriously these variables. Next slide, please. And then just coming back to what was said by Andy about the digital illiteracy, we see that these people who should be most advantaged by the e-commerce, for example, if because they could liberate some time for them if they can do some e-commerce activities like shopping for food, and in this way they don't do that, and this is because they are not always they have these tools, the literacy or the good connection to Wi-Fi or a good smartphone for doing the for using the application. And as well because the application most of the time are not designed with an universal design approach, especially for people who face some or some disabilities or some illiteracy or poverty in digital resources. So if we go to the, and this is, all these people are, most of them are the frontline person, people who needs to move for caring. So like we said before, most of them are women. So if we go to the next slide, without saying that during the pandemic time, these people who are in charge of caring were as well more affected by the COVID. And we have this double poverty related with the transport and as well with the health caring. So what we can do, first of all, we need to make visible the unmet needs. And the notion of needs is related to the benefits. So estimating the benefits of a population means measuring how much their needs are covered. And this is a key point. We need to just to take some distance from cost-benefit analysis and go into this new way to see the assessment of transport. And making needs visible is essential for measuring transport equity. And for that, I will just to give you more some feedback. You can, if you would like more information, you can read some this a chapter in this book on measuring transport equity. Next slide, please, just for finalize. So, what is equity? We in climate change conference of parties, we asked for equity, but as well for justice. And this is something that we need to take into account. And we need to ensure the mobility of people who are more in need of moving, because they are sustaining the life of their family, but as well our life of society. And in the context of inaccessibility and segregation, the forms of claiming the right is for pursuing everyday life activities is translated into statements of dissatisfaction, like we have seen in the survey, but it could be until to more virulent street protest. And this is what happened in Chile, and it was an amazing process, because from this protest, just born in the transport sector, we had the possibility to have a renewal in the society as well. So we have not any more excuse for needs and for not covering the needs, and we can go on for that. So that's all from my side. Sorry, I passed, I think, 1 minute.
No problem. We give you the extra minutes because you're working in the middle of the night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for introducing us to the term time poverty. I had not heard that before. It's, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions in the Q&A. I'd like to move on now and introduce Professor Yoram Shifton from the Technion, which is the Israel Institute of Technology. Yoram is Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering in the Technion. Excuse me. He specializes in travel behavior, transport policy, and transport project evaluation. He's the head of the Israeli Center for Smart Transportation Research and was the editor of the Transport Policy Journal and chair of the International Association of Travel Behavior Research, IATBR. He received his PhD from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and since then he's published over 100 papers and co-edited 5 books. Overall, he spent many years as a visiting professor in leading universities in Europe and the US, and most recently at Northwestern University in Chicago. Yoram, welcome. Oh, can we hear you? Are you on mute? just getting his slides sorted out.
I think Yoram did what I did. Unfortunately, I think he probably,
Did he drop off?
yeah, I think he may
Do you
have
hear me
finished.
now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
Can't see your slides yet, though.
Yeah, okay. Let me, 1 second, go back to the slide. I'll share again.
Okay.
Sorry for the technology
No problem.
here. Now let me bring the presentation up.
It's loading. Okay, we can see your schedule. Yep.
Now you see my presentation?
Excellent.
Okay, now you see me, you hear me, and you see my presentation, correct?
There we go.
Okay, so I'm starting. So thank you, Bob, for introducing me. And thanks, Andy, for really setting this big stage and therefore pointing out some of the issues and problems. I want to pretty much focus on one point, which I think is the issue of our problem is really moving into more equity, or what I call just transition. And this is more about the planning process, the planning and evaluation of the way we do plan transportation. I would say that in addition to my academic roles, which Bob presented, I'm also doing a lot of consulting work in Israel. I did in the past in the US a lot. Mainly, we have a major infrastructure investment in Israel now, and I'm pretty much consulting the government on all these strategic plans. This work I'm presenting you today is based on a paper, and a 45 minutes presentation and paper I presented in ITF roundtable of the OECD last year on this topic, and I'm giving you the highlights from that. So, as I said, I think one of the problem is really how we view the purpose of transportation planning. And if I look at here, we mostly usually care about efficient and effective movement. There's a traditional approach. We do put a lot of focus on safety and environmental, and somehow providing adequate accessibility for all is usually not in the first place. We do account it, but not as the main things. And the many times other policy objective. And accordingly, the method we are used to evaluate projects and to make decisions regarding transportation investment are the most common in the cost-benefit analysis. There is a multi-criteria analysis which enable more to bring into equity issues, but also doesn't put it in the front. So the main problem in cost-benefit analysis, the way we do it in transportation in other fields as well, that it's by definition an aggregate measure. We want to maximize welfare. And we don't distinguish between certain group of people. The way we look, how much we save travel time, save accidents, save emissions, but we don't look at how it distributed between different population groups. One of the other problem there is one of the main issues which we evaluate in project evaluation is saving travel time. And then we use what we call the value of time, which is based on people willingness to pay, and obviously the rich willing to pay more. We do have a way to account for it, but it's not enough. We do use one value for everybody. But richer people also make more trips, more benefit, more time saving. And we really view travel time as the main benefit empirically. And I did a lot. I specialize in evaluating transport, appraised transport project and cost benefit and impact assessment. So empirically, usually travel time saving is the main benefit. So there is a contradiction which cannot really be solved, and theoretically even, between the maximized social welfare and accounting for equity. That must be somewhere in a way that we try how we account for equity. And even when we account for equity, it's not an objective function. In multi-criteria, we have a way to implement a lot of equity measure. So in multi-criteria, we can put various equity measure like Gini, how they distributed, how travel time is saving between different population group. But again, this does not guarantee that equitable or sustainable projects score better than projects that are clearly less. So the idea is that in general, both cost-benefit analysis, and I went over it, I now see that I have more, I went a little bit too quickly regarding my time. I hope I explained this issue okay, that again, that cost-benefit, and we do some correction for equity, but again, in multi-criteria, we include equity indices, but again, they do not guarantee that most equity project will be chosen. So the main point that I want to make, that in my view, and this is a view we shared with my co-author of this paper, mostly Professor Karl Martens for the Technion as well, that equity should be actually the key goal of the government policies. And this is done in other fields, like education. We ensure free education to everybody, at least in Israel. We ensure some minimum housing, some minimum health. Okay, maybe some less in the US, but in Israel and other social countries. While in transportation, this is not coming any as a way of, we have a lot of different ways. It's not coming as an issue. So we claim that the view of transport system should be, first of all, to provide adequate accessibility to all. This is still need to come into practice, how we define adequate accessibility. It will never be completely equated, but that's clear. We do account for equity in distribution of externalities and other impacts, but those are only of secondary importance. So what we suggest is actually to redefine the term transportation planning as a field of government that seeks to guarantee adequate accessibility for all through the regulation, operation, maintenance, and improve of transport system. And accordingly, equity should be the main objective of the initial stage of transport planning. And this is not the way it's coming today in most practical application. We have various objectives, and then we check what the impact of equity. One other thing that I want to show, and this is one example for one project. This is the biggest strategic plan currently in Israel is a new metro system, estimated 40 billion euro investment. And in all these projects that I'm involved, we'll try to put a lot of equity indices, show what the impact on equity in the objective to actually show government, show policymaker the equity implication of project. We claim that the more we show, the more policymaker will account for equity. So just this is one example I'm showing here. This is basically, we have the accessibility of socioeconomic groups for today and for 2040 after implementation of the strategic plan. Basically, this line shows the accessibility today by socioeconomic group. 10 is the highest, so you see the higher socioeconomic group have high accessibility. This is kind of not enough observation, 1 or 2. It's basically a straight line, trend. And we show that while in the metro plan that we have, we improve accessibility to all, but we improve it mostly for the low socioeconomic group. And that's what the red line show. We improve it to all, but the improvement is mostly strong to a lower socioeconomic group. So, and this will be my last slide. What I'm saying there, basically there is a need for a shift in the way we plan transportation system and evaluate them. Adequate accessibility for all should be the purpose of transportation planning with focus on population group. This will lead to projects that aim to reduce the number of people experiencing inadequate accessibility. And as I said in the last slide, it's really important to present to policymaker various equity measures to increase the likelihood that the project selected will enhance equity. We need, that's where I'm this in my role as a consultant, and as academic, actually in both roles, we have to really push it up to the government, to the policymaker, that they need to account for it. And that's here, I'm even short of half a minute. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yoram. I appreciate that. And I think, again, we're picking up a common theme of the need to measure equity, the need to come up with parameters that we can optimize. Thank you very much. Let me move on to Amar and Shafia. I believe, Amar, that Shafia is not going to join us. You're going to do the presentation. Is that right? I think you're on mute.
Okay. Sorry, I was mute. That's right. Unfortunately, she will not able to join us, but now I'll share the screen and I will present us a very quick presentation.
So this is a joint presentation that was developed by Shafia Alkali and Amar from the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates. And go ahead, Amar, over to you.
Thank you, Bob. I will try to be very quick and summarized, actually. Just a quick overview of our Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure's purpose and visions. We are trying to build an effective multimode transportation, which is provide seamless and efficient journey for all users in case of public transportations and also the private sectors as well, to enhance the economy. As well, building a transportation system with high connectivity and accessibility, affordability, and also safe for all users. However, we have a lot of initiatives actually. Now we are working closely with RTA Dubai and RTA Sharjah to build a metro between cities. Okay, now RTA Dubai, okay, they announced that more than 461 million people used last year the metro only and public transportation. And at the same time, they for the equity, if we need to define an equity in UAE, we are trying to give for all people a safe trip, affordable and also accessible, as well as with high satisfaction. I think the measuring of equity, it will be by satisfaction of the people. You can build equity system for transportation, but the people are not satisfied, or the let's say the social aspects are not that effective or efficient in transportation. In this case, Dubai government, actually, the local government of Dubai, they did a special questionnaire recently, okay, and they found that most of the, let's say, demands of the people, they are requesting to have a separate shelter or cabinet for women and children to have more privacy and more comfort zones for them. So they launched a special cabinet for the children and women. However, for the back again to UAE vision, we are looking for customer journey for first mile and last mile. We are looking for individual users, freights, and also passengers, and how we can integrate all of them in case of aviation sectors or land transport as well. The maritime, we are looking for a very high efficient connectivity system for them to maintain the level of satisfactions and also the level of economy and connectivity for the public transportations. If we go for microvision in terms of first mile, last mile equity, we are looking for affordability, accessibility, efficiency, connectivity, and multi-modes as well, sustainability in terms of air pollutions and also the environment and user-friendly of moving and let's say transportations. As well, we are working closely in UAE with the UN Habitat, especially our ministry are responsible for SDG 11.2 KPI, which is by the KPI. This KPI or this indicator are mainly focusing on the accessibility of public transportation. The UN divided or segregated by 3 main categories, which is gender, age, and as well disability. So we are working closely with UN, and recently the average it's around 87%, and we are reaching now 84%, below the average. Okay, but we are trying to have more initiatives through the whole UAE Emirates to maintain the level or to reach the level of the average. That's all, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amar. I think thank you for giving us a very concise presentation, and also for speaking on behalf of Shafia. We hope her meeting with the minister goes well. Let's move on to Q&A. I think a lot of questions and answers have been provided in the chat. I would encourage you that if you don't have the chat box open, to take a look, and you'll see quite a few questions and answers. I think we had a wonderful range, and really I kind of expected this, that we're not really coming up with too many answers today. There's a lot of questions, and maybe that's the status of the subject right now. To me, equity is about having a choice, but it's also about knowing that you have a choice. So I think Andy mentioned mobility as a service. I think that's one way in which we can inform people about what choices they do have, as well as making the choices for them. Yoram, yeah, great points on the need to measure equity. I think, again, Andy had the quote from Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you can't measure. I would also say that if you're still only measuring it, then you're still not managing it. We need to look at ways to do analytics. I'm very interested in the marketing world, where they're saying that they can achieve a market segment of 1 because of the big data and analytics that are around these days. I wonder if we can achieve a market segment of 1 in transport as well. So I think we've covered all the questions. I think Floridia had to drop off. Oh no, she's there. Floridia, I had a question for you. You think there's a relationship between equity and climate impact? For example, if we address equity properly, will it also have effects on other things like our effect on the climate? Not sure if Floridia is there or not. I don't know. Can I bounce that question to you, Andy? You've always got
yeah, I have not a good connection, so yes, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. We could hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was, if we effectively address the equity challenge, do we also address climate change, carbon footprint, and greenhouse gases? I think we've got a connection problem.
Yeah, well, I'll try to take a shot at it, and I also have other questions. Somebody lined up here, Bob. So
Okay.
I think to some degree, yes, we can, but at the same time, are we really factoring in all the costs in terms of making information available to people, and they can make a better educated decision, so that moves them away from fossil heavy transportation choices to something more cleaner and also much more accessible, I would say, like public transportation. So I'm not sure if it fully addresses all these questions in terms of like shifting or addressing the major issues, but I think it does, to some degree, answer some of the questions that we want to get to, right? And looking at the question on the side here, I'm jumping here 1 second to the chat box. One of the questions is from Carlo asking, do you really see the often dreamt of robotaxi system is going to make a difference, a sensible difference, right? So there's a big discussion in our forums in many places in Europe and North America. What is the viability of these systems as they mature, right? The business conversation has shifted quite a bit, because the subsidized mobility options like Uber and whatnot, they are now starting to rethink their pricing model. So which will probably make a lot of these questions much more difficult, and adoption is going to be much more difficult as well when the business side of the conversation is not answered, because right now these AV systems are prohibitively expensive for an individual like myself and you to adopt. So it's going to be eventually starting with the fleet, and then we move from there. So the very first commercial offering has come out in San Francisco from Cruise, and I think a few others are in the pipeline as well. So I think all these different solutions and pilots that are being tested, I think they are probably going to answer sort of like the viability of the technology itself. And we are starting to see that same technology being being dropped into Dubai. So we will see how it works in a different environment. Can we answer some of these pricing questions, so that makes adoption a bit more easier. So to answer the question, is it going to make a sensible difference? Yes, but it's going to be a while before we answer some of the questions. So there you go.
Thanks, Andy. I think in the interest of time, I need to stop the Q&A. I think there are probably many more questions to be discussed. I think we should consider today to be a starting point rather than an end point. And I'd like to hand over to Benedict to round the thing off.
Thank you, Bob. I replaced Benedict for a minute, as he had to leave for another meeting. But thank you, Bob. And I would like to give a small gift from the chamber for our great keynote and panelists. Now you will see it on your screen, which is a tree certificate that we plant tree for each and every one of our great panelists, for Andy, for Amar, and also for Nali, and also for Florida here. And here it is for Shafia. You can pass it to her, please, as I know she contributed a lot during to preparation of your presentation. Amar, and here it is for Yoram. And this is our small gift from the chamber to our great panelists. And now you have some trees in Africa. Hope one day you can visit there and water them. Thank you, Bob. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Serdar. Again, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to the panelists for making this a fascinating and compelling webinar. I think we have actually planted some trees here today, and it'll be interesting to see how they grow, how our tree of knowledge grows about equity and how to not just measure it but manage it. I know there's a lot of bold political statements being made about equity. And I think there is a responsibility to make sure that the goals being set can be achieved. And I think with this talent and with our technology and data and tools available, we can do that. Thanks very much again, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Bob. Great job. Indeed.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Bob. Have a
Bye,
great day.
Benedict. Bye,
you.
Bob.
Bye-bye.
Great job. Thank you.
Hey, Serdar, are you still there?
Yes, Marcus.
Serdar, I'll send. Very good one, by the way. So the meeting was really good.
Thank you. And some others are still inside the call,
Oh.
Yeah. So if anything in particular, we can talk maybe a few minutes later, or you can leave here and stay here, and we can talk if you like.
Yep, I'll stay here.
Okay. So all is fine, Marcus.
Yeah. Sorry, I've been in the last 2.5 months. I had a crazy situation. I'll talk to John about it, but I'll talk to you in a minute.
Okay. So sometimes people just stay and just skips to turn the connection off, right? So
Andy's presentation there, I mean, it's spot on. I think there are some profound points there, especially the future of mobility thing. It's just